The protagonist says he's just a poor man who still fights until the end, while we see him being beaten by some thugs who tell him they'll give him another day to pay them. The protagonist then wanders the streets, explaining that he's an orphan who became homeless when the orphanage he lived in caught fire. His life seemed to improve at the age of 18 when he partnered with some friends to do business, but one of them took his girlfriend and left him in a lot of trouble. So, he had to resort to borrowing money from criminals to pay off his debts. But when he couldn't pay it back on time, they came to beat him up. Then the protagonist reaches an alley, where he finds a baby abandoned in the trash, seemingly lifeless. So, he takes the baby in his arms and tells him he hopes that in his next life, he will be reborn as a rich and strong person. The protagonist arrives in a forest, where he digs a hole to bury the baby. Suddenly, he hears laughter and sees the baby standing, smiling, and laughing. This scares the protagonist, and the baby tells him that he's still alive, then jumps in front of the protagonist's face. He says that since he helped him, he will now help the protagonist change his life. He realized that the protagonist's destiny is truly bad, but when he looks again, he sees that the protagonist has fainted. The baby says he's losing mana and suggests that maybe it's better if the dogs take the protagonist away, but he hesitates for a moment. Then the protagonist wakes up in an elegant room and wonders where he is. The baby, who now looks like a child, tells him that he's finally awake and calls the protagonist by his name. This confuses and scares the protagonist, who begins to ask about the whole situation and if the talking baby was a dream. Then the child tells him to calm down because he's in his mansion. He says he's an immortal master named Shinhyudao Shenyuzi, who was disturbed, so he returned to an infantile state. In that state, he was stolen and couldn't escape, so he's alive thanks to the protagonist. When he picked him up, Shenyuzi could absorb enough energy to regain consciousness, and then use his mana to maintain his 7-year-old appearance. He tells the protagonist that he now has access to his power and offers to teach him how to use it to become a powerful being. But the protagonist tells him that he reads too many fantasy manhwas, so he rejects the offer and leaves. Back in the city, the thugs find the protagonist again and demand the payment he promised. But the protagonist still has no money, so they prepare to beat him up again. When the protagonist uses a power and sends one of them flying, it angers the other thugs who draw knives and say they will kill him for resisting. But with an accidental move, the protagonist breaks the first thug's arm and easily dodges the second's attack because he feels he's moving too slowly. He then hits him in the face and slams him into a metal curtain. So, he understands that what Shenyuzi said was true and goes back to the child, who is waiting for him, and asks if he wants to hear his plan. The protagonist thinks that he was a poor man until he picked up that child from the trash, and his life began to change. The protagonist kneels and asks Shen for money to pay off his debt in exchange for losing all his abilities. But Shen tells him to lift his head because he already has his support. He reveals that he is actually poor as well because he used all his savings to buy the mansion to profit from it in the future. But then he ended up turned into a child. However, he claims to have a plan to make a fortune, which is to help the rich capture demons, but the protagonist refuses to do it. Shen insists that he can do it because he has him, all the while thinking that he wouldn't be stuck with the protagonist if the gods hadn't taken away his powers. He tells the protagonist that he has nowhere else to go and asks if he still wants to spend the rest of his life fighting, making the protagonist realize that he's right. So, he agrees to do it. Shen then hands him some papers, which he says will be their first job, and they will depart in 3 days. During that time, he will teach him how to fight. The job involves dealing with a spirit that has possessed Miss Jiang, a member of the Jiang family. 3 days later, the pair arrives at the mansion, where they encounter more spiritual experts who are also seeking to do the job. Meanwhile, some nurses exit the room with one of the experts terribly injured, and Shen mentions that the higher the reward, the greater the risk. The other experts start mocking Shen and the protagonist, considering them a child and a sickly young man. Shen then orders the protagonist to take care of them, and they underestimate him. At this moment, the protagonist remembers how people have taken advantage of him since childhood because he had no parents. He challenges the experts to attack him all at once to see who will regret it in the end, enraging them, and they prepare to attack. The mansion's butler requests that they don't fight, but Shen assures him not to worry, saying that the protagonist will finish it quickly. The experts unleash their abilities and threaten the protagonist, telling him he's going to hell. However, he sends them all flying with a single blow, leaving the butler astonished. The family then requests the next expert to enter, and the pair proceeds to find a girl tied to her bed with blood splattered around. We are told that the girl's name is Kang Yinan, the only daughter of the Jiang family, and the protagonist finds her beautiful. so Shen tells him he's drooling too much. The mother then asks the pair how they should address them, and Shen says they are the Ling Ning brothers, which the protagonist thinks is a poor combination of their names. The girl's father warns them that the demon that possessed his daughter is not ordinary and has doubts about them because they are very young. Shen tells the protagonist to start and show them what he's capable of. The boy says he first needs to prepare the 3 guandeng, or mantra lights, as with this incantation, the spirit won't be able to hide from them. The protagonist complies and prepares the first guandeng, Demons of Yangguang, the second, Soul Gazing, and the third, with which he commands it to reveal itself. A strange aura emanates from the girl, making her tremble, until suddenly she rises into the air, releasing dark energy while screaming in pain. The father realizes the demon is coming out, and the protagonist is also frightened. Shen tells him that she's still bound, so he should follow his instructions. The girl locks eyes with them and begins to charge a dark projectile in her mouth, exhaling it in the form of dark fire that the protagonist narrowly dodges. He asks Shen if he should now hit her with a 2nd level spell, but Shen tells him it would hurt her, so he must first expel the evil spirit from her body. The protagonist says he can't get close to her because she's attacking him, but Shen reveals that he has protection due to his powers, so if that dark Kai hits him, he won't feel a thing. The protagonist charges straight at the girl, who attacks him again with dark projectiles, which he takes head on, confirming that they don't harm him. He manages to place his hand on the girl's head and expels the evil spirit from her body, which turns out to be a kind of spiritual fox. Then Shen tells the protagonist that he can now use the 2nd level spell to attack it. He starts to cast it, and the fox asks him to please forgive it, but the protagonist doesn't listen and fires the spell, disintegrating the spirit. The girl wakes up and sees her hopeful parents by her side. Her father explains that thanks to the help of the protagonist and Shen, the evil spirit is gone, and she regained consciousness. Shen greets her, and the girl asks if it was that little boy who saved her. Shen confirms and tells her that it was also the protagonist, both of whom together saved her from the wicked fox spirit. The protagonist nervously greets her, and the girl appears to have a somber expression. Suddenly, she leaps and hugs the protagonist, which makes him blush. With tears in her eyes, she thanks him for saving her. Moments later, the father rewards them for saving his daughter and says that it's a very fortunate day as the Jiang family will always be in their debt. However, Shen interrupts and tells him not to thank them just yet. He has examined his daughter's body and found that she has an extremely rare yin body, which is the reason she was so easily possessed by the demon. In addition, being born into an affluent family in itself tempts evil spirits. So, even if they defeated the fox, a demon from any other animal could appear with intentions to possess his daughter. This scares the father, and he bows down, begging Shen to please save his daughter at all costs. The child reassures him, saying not to worry and get up because he can be sure that nothing will happen to her. As long as he pays them generously, they will be there to make sure no demon dares to possess his daughter. He mentions the fee, and the determined father says he will pay as much as he can as long as his daughter is safe. He orders the butler to hand them 4 suitcases full of money. The couple leaves, and on the way home, the protagonist tells Shen that the girl's situation is lamentable, as there are too many evil demons that can possess her body, so they must protect her at all costs. However, Shen jumps and hits him on the head, calling him a fool. He explains that he lied to the father just to make the problem seem bigger than it was and get a reward 5 times more substantial. The protagonist thinks the child is very greedy, but then he realizes that he has a sum of money he had never seen in his life. He tries to claim his share, but Shen tells him it's time to celebrate. The protagonist asks how they could spend 10 million in one go, but the child says he used to spend 100 million in one night. So that night, he will introduce him to the world of the rich, and we see them on a gambling yacht. The protagonist says they shouldn't gamble and should deposit the money in the bank. However, the child tells him he's an immortal Taoist, so he can beat the odds of gambling. They both arrive at a VIP lounge where the butler stops them and tells them it's a place only for those with a net worth of tens of millions. Shen takes offense to this and asks if it's because the butler thinks they don't have money. However, the butler clarifies that it's because the stakes are high, so they won't be able to enjoy the game for long. So, the pair shows him all the golden chips they have, and the butler allows them to enter. Shen mentions that the money they win can only go to charity, but he still enjoys making bets and winning. However, with his appearance, he can't do it himself, so he tells the protagonist that he will be the one to play. The protagonist places his bet, and the girl in charge rolls the dice. Shen instructs the protagonist to control his breathing and slowly infuse his mana into his eyes. When the protagonist does this, he can see the dice inside the cup. Suddenly, some time has passed, and people gather around the protagonist's table because he has won a bunch of games in a row. People say his luck is overwhelming, and some have won dozens of times thanks to him. When the protagonist makes a bet, others follow suit, which worries the girl in charge. She presses a button, causing one of the dice to flip. This worries the protagonist, but Shen tells him it's time to use the soul transformation method. He instructs him to concentrate his mana in his brain and then think of an image of a mosquito. Energy shoots out of his head and turns into one, which flies into the glass, returning the dice to their place. This secures another victory, and when they collect the chips, the protagonist learns that each one is worth 1,000,000, which terrifies him. Then Shen notices the hostile expression of the woman, so they prepare to leave to play at another table. However, she calls them and says her boss wants to meet them due to their incredible luck. The protagonist has a bad feeling, but Shen reassures him. In the boss's room, they see their entire reward, and the boss, named Hongai, appears and tells them they can keep the money if they beat him in his game. The protagonist mentions it could be a trap, but Shen says he wants to hear what the game is about. So, the boss tells them to bet on something interesting since they are not ordinary people. When a huge muscular man appears behind him, the boss suggests they play in a fist fight. Hongai tells them that they can't stop until one of them has fallen, warning them that his fighter is a war veteran. He asks if they are willing to fight him, and if they're not, they can leave, but they would have to forfeit all the money. The protagonist asks Shen what he should do, and Shen tells him not to worry because that man can't defeat him. He warns him that despite being connected to his power, his body has limitations. It's like a wooden box filled with water, and the exit hole is very small, so the water that comes out is minimal. His goal is to widen that hole, and the most effective way is to get a stronger body. So the protagonist decides to fight. The veteran remarks that the protagonist looks sick and says he'll crush him with one hand. However, the protagonist moves faster and manages to hit him in the face. Nevertheless, the man blocks the attack, saying he didn't expect him to be so powerful, and then counterattacks. Shen thinks that even though the protagonist has become stronger thanks to his power, he can't defeat his opponent with brute force alone. The veteran strikes the protagonist, who realizes he needs to create some distance. He jumps back and decides to use spells instead of his fists. He casts a spell just as the man is about to hit him again. The use of magic surprises Hongai, who asks his champion if he's okay. The champion sees that he barely suffered any damage, so he resumes the attack, saying that those hits don't hurt at all. The protagonist confirms this but realizes he has poor balance. He provokes the veteran to attack him with all his might, and the veteran falls into his trap, ready to finish him. So, the protagonist attacks his leg, swiftly moving behind his opponent. At this point, we see that Shen warned him that they would face both monsters and humans. The child said he would use a spell if that happened, but his master reprimanded him, telling him he needed to learn martial arts to defeat humans solely with his physical strength. He told him that the weakness of humans is always behind the head, and if he strikes that area, he'll bring down any opponent. The protagonist does just that, and the veteran is knocked out. Shen prepares to collect the money, but Hongai asks him to stop, having now seen that they are Taoism masters. He has a request for them, which is to help him eliminate a monster, and if they do, they will receive even more rewards. Shen eagerly asks him for more details. The pair learns that it's a piece of land purchased at a low price due to rumors of monsters in the area, and it's called Mainin Village. So, they will go the next day to look for a guy whom the owners have been searching for all over the world. At that moment, the protagonist is about to leave and tells Shen that it's time to repay his debt to the loan shark because he now has the money and should do it. Shen says he'll accompany him because he's bored. They arrive at the building where the thugs are, and the protagonist enters by knocking down the door. The thugs prepare to confront him, saying they're not afraid, when the protagonist throws bundles of cash at them and says it's the money for his debt. The leader apologizes and says his debt is paid, hoping he won't hold a grudge against them for following orders and collecting in a violent manner. The protagonist tells them to stop doing such things, or else he'll come after them, and the thug agrees. The pair leaves, and the protagonist says they can now focus on capturing monsters and getting rich. But then they come across an elderly woman who is also with the thugs, and the protagonist says they have to see what they are doing to her. The thug leader tells the old woman that her money is no longer enough, and she argues that it's the sum they agreed upon in the contract. But he destroys the contract and says it's been too long, so the interest has gone up, and now she owes an extra 100,000. She says she can't pay it because the reason she took the loan is that she doesn't have money. So, the thug threatens to harm her daughter-in-law and granddaughter if she doesn't pay. She pleads with him not to harm them, The thug is about to hit her for touching him when the protagonist appears and punches him. The thug gets up and tells the protagonist they're not afraid of him, so they all pull out bats and surround him. They say he can't be a hero to save the lady because they'll extort money from him and kidnap her to sell her organs if necessary. This infuriates the protagonist, who immediately hits the two who were trying to attack him from behind. He then swiftly reaches the leader, who didn't even have time to react. The protagonist stands in front of him and declares that from that moment, the city is his, and he won't allow them to do bad things in his territory. He then returns to Shen, who have let the elderly woman go with protection, and they prepare to go to Manhwa village. The pair arrives at the so-called village of handsome men, but the protagonist feels as if it's still under construction. Then, a police officer approaches them and asks who they are, and they tell him they are demon hunters. The policeman then tells them that the residents warned the construction workers that destroying the village would disturb the gods. However, the supervisor decided to continue until one day the sky turned red, and black smoke kidnapped a handsome boy. From that day on, all attractive boys were captured by the banshee. The protagonist asks what the monster looked like, and the police officer describes her as a mature woman with a good body. Shen understands that she must have been sealed somewhere on the construction site, but the construction work broke the seal and awakened her. The police officer tells them that people saw the abductees being taken to the top of the mountain, so the pair heads in that direction, and the protagonist asks his master if he's sure about this. Shen confirms and says the money will come in handy when suddenly he feels a tremor in the ground and warns the protagonist to be careful. The ground then explodes, and a black strip wraps around the protagonist, which he immediately cuts, telling Shen to stay away. However, when the dust clears, there is no one there, and Shen says the banshee knows earth escape techniques. Then more strips emerge from the ground and capture the protagonist. The banshee appears and approaches Shen with interest, but the protagonist tells her he's the opponent and breaks free. The banshee attacks him again, but the protagonist manages to dodge her powers and kicks her away, then uses a spell that pushes her back. When the smoke clears again, he sees that the banshee managed to escape, and Shen tells him not to pursue her. We then see that the banshee was injured and needs to consume more handsome boys to recover. So the pair decides to return to the village, light a fire to prevent her from escaping entirely, and protect the handsome boys, waiting for her to attack again. Some time later, the protagonist sleeps peacefully under a tree when suddenly someone covers his nose, waking him up due to the lack of air. It's Yinan, and the protagonist asks her what she's doing there. She tells him to call her older sister. Shen explains that she will be their disciple from now on, and between the two of them, she will be the older sister. We then see the night before when Shen took a walk in the forest and encountered someone hiding. He asked what the person wanted since they had been following them for an entire day. It was Yinan, who said she wanted to hunt monsters with them. Shen initially said they didn't have time to play, but she argued that the Taoist had told her father that he would attract many monsters and already had one inside, so she had to go with them until that one was destroyed. She insisted that she was a half-immortal being and wouldn't lie about her vow, which ultimately convinced Shen. Yinan became their disciple. The protagonist complains that he should then be the older one, but Shen tells him there are many economic benefits to taking her in. Plus, it could be an opportunity for the protagonist because Shen knows he likes the girl. The protagonist blushes and denies it but secretly applauds Shen in his mind. The three of them head to the village and meet with all the handsome boys seeking refuge. One of them doubts that the three of them can do anything, so the protagonist asks him if he's afraid of heights, lifts him high in the air, and drops him safely to the ground. Yinan questions whether it was too much, but Shen says it was necessary to show their strength. Now they need a handsome boy to serve as bait to lure the banshee into their trap. However, none of the handsome boys volunteer, claiming they are too handsome to die. The protagonist offers to go, but Shen insists that the bait must be a handsome boy, not a useless one, and he is the one who needs to capture the banshee. Shen tells the person in charge of the boys that it won't work because he's just a child, but he confidently replies that they'll see tomorrow. The next day, the supervisor and the boys are waiting for Master Shen, wondering why he hasn't appeared yet. Suddenly, someone comes out of the house, and all three are extremely surprised. It's Shen, naked and in his teenage form. He tells them that if they've seen enough, they should give him some clothes before he catches a cold. Shen warns them that he can't maintain that form for long, and he'll become weak, so Yinan should take him to a safe place when the time comes, and his life will depend on the protagonist. At night, Shen walks alone in the forest to attract the banshee. When she appears, she comments on what an incredible man the boy is. Shen begins to run, but he's still far from the trap, and the banshee catches up with her attack. The protagonist wants to intervene, but Yinan tells him he hasn't entered the barrier yet, and they must wait. The Banshee is about to capture Shen when he evades her by returning to his child form. He signals the protagonist, and he appears behind the Banshee. The monster woman avoids the blow and attacks the protagonist, but he stops her powers and strikes her. Overwhelmed, she tries to escape underground again, but her tentacles bounce off due to the barrier set by the protagonist's group. He prepares to execute her when she asks him to let her go because she has her own problems. This makes the protagonist hesitate for a moment, and the Banshee takes advantage and attacks him again while he's off guard. However, the protagonist survives and, with a spell, shoots a beam of energy that finishes off the Banshee. 1 week later, the village has regained its prosperity thanks to the monster's annihilation. Shen scolds the protagonist for showing compassion even though his goal was to kill her. The protagonist asks if it's okay that he didn't take the reward, but Yinan tells him that the offer of receiving land as a gift is even better. At that moment, the protagonist sees something behind them, a knife, which he easily deflects, and he asks who the person is. It turns out to be a female assassin who tells them to go to hell. She asks them if they are the Lingdeng brothers and comments that their name is terrible. The protagonist asks who she is, and the girl responds that she is the head of the Genzin sect of Shu Mountain, called Ma Zioyu. This seems to surprise the protagonist at first, but he doesn't actually recognize her. When he asks Shen if he's heard of her, both the boy and Yinan say they haven't. Shen tells her not to criticize their name because their sect name is also terrible. This irritates the girl, who says that even though she is the only member, sooner or later, the Gengsin sect will be famous worldwide. She then lunges at the protagonist, stating that she will make them know how powerful she is. The protagonist dodges her attack and asks her why she's attacking them. But the girl only responds that he should stop talking nonsense, unsheathes her wooden sword, and charges at him. He thinks he can easily break a simple wooden sword. Instead of using it to strike him, she channels several dart-like rays of light, which surprise the protagonist and manage to hit him. He tries to hit the girl, but she dodges and kicks him in the face. The protagonist then channels his spell, but Zioyu does the same, and both shots collide with each other. Shen recognizes it as the traditional Taoist fencing style of Shu Mountain. Zioyu says the protagonist is too weak and wonders how he was removed from the demon hunters list. Yinan asks what that list is, but Shen also knows nothing about it, so he tells the protagonist to finish the fight before attracting an audience. The girl charges at him again, warning him not to underestimate her. However, the protagonist realizes that the girl's sword is flexible, and there's no way for a beginner like him to win with frontal attacks. So he decides to channel spiritual energy into his bandages, using them to trap and steal her sword and then bring her down. However, the attack goes wrong, and he ends up disrobing her. He closes his eyes and says he didn't do it on purpose, and Zioyu slaps him for being a pervert. Later in the mansion, the girl explains that the list is a website that registers all demon hunters, organizing them by rank so that clients can find them more conveniently. They were ranked 50th, which is where she was, and they left her out. The protagonist mentions that the site isn't on the internet, and annoyed, Zioyu tells him he's foolish because the site is on the dark web. Shen confirms it and finds many of his old friends there. He asks Zioyu if she only bothered them for that reason, and she explains that the website features offers for demon cases. The best ones are limited to the top 50 in the rankings, which meant she lost her income because of them. So Shen checks the assignments and discovers one at Kyanlong Lake. The protagonist is surprised that the commission is for 5 million, and Zioyu tells him to accept it before someone else takes it. Shen tells her the commission is already theirs and asks why she's so nervous. So the girl offers to take the commission for them and give them 20% of the reward. Shen agrees after raising it to 30% and tells her they will contact her when they have confirmed the assignment, asking the protagonist to accompany her to the exit. He does, but when they leave, the girl sneezes because of the cold, so the protagonist gives her his jacket and tells her to be careful not to catch a cold. This makes the girl blush, and she asks for his phone number, but she saves it in her contacts as pervert because she says he's a pervert who likes to spy on her body. She tells him she will call him later, and if he doesn't answer, he'll be dead, so the protagonist says she's like a little sister to him. The protagonist goes back inside and asks Shen what they will do now, to which he responds that they will prepare to investigate the shipwreck at Kyanlong Lake. The protagonist realizes that Shen lied to Zioyu, and Shen tells him that's correct because they are short on money. The protagonist doesn't think it's a good idea, and Shen teases him by saying he saw the girl naked once and he's already into her, which annoys Yinan. The protagonist asks his master what the real reason is because he doesn't believe it's just about the money. Shen says he's become smarter, and the second reason is that the assignment is in Japan. There are many powerful hunters and warriors there, but it's a Japanese case that appears on the Chinese list, which means no one there can or wants to solve it. He can't let Xiaoyu risk something so dangerous. Yinan asks the boy why he wants to protect her, and he says it's because of the pendant she's wearing, which says it belongs to a friend of his named Xuan Yzi, who disappeared a long time ago. Then the protagonist asks if he has a passport to travel to Japan, but Shen says they don't need it because they can use Yinan's family's private plane. Yinan tells him that money allows her to do whatever she wants. The protagonist asks Shen why they depend on the girl when they've made a lot of money, and he explains it's because they don't have enough connections, and he can't use his connections because the fact that he's still alive is a secret. Besides, they are broke again because he bought something to help him in his training. Yinan then opens a briefcase full of gemstones, which she says help absorb and cultivate their energy much faster, something that large sects and organizations use to gain greater influence over the world. So that's her gift to the protagonist because it has the strength to surpass his current level, and she wants him to do it during the 2 hours it will take them to get to Japan to show the Japanese what they can do. Shen explains to the protagonist that he only obtained a part of his power, but he doesn't have the foundations to achieve even a fraction of what he could do. This leaves him defenseless against other cultivators, so he needs to build his foundations that day. Yinan asks the master why he wants him to do it on the plane when it would be safer on solid ground. Shen explains that it's because the protagonist is taking a path that no one has taken before, so he doesn't know if that will cause him any problems. The protagonist enters a meditative state and redirects his energy to the meridians in his body to purify his flesh. Then the energy starts flowing from the gemstones, and the protagonist feels how his body has begun to absorb it, rapidly building his foundations and achieving a breakthrough. Suddenly, the vision of his meditation is shattered, leaving him in what seems like a golden sky, and he wonders if this is what it feels like to build the foundations. There, he sees Shen and Yinan, who are still observing him on the plane, and he says he used to be a loser, but thanks to them, he was reborn, so he can't let them down. Back on the plane, the protagonist begins to gather more and more energy, which surprises Shen, who says that the protagonist is trying to make multiple continuous breakthroughs, and now he's halfway to reaching the nucleus formation. A sphere of light then enters the protagonist, and he finally awakens. Yinan congratulates him on his breakthrough, and the protagonist asks if there are parachutes on the plane because they'll need to escape. He turns to the cockpit, and an elderly man comes out, saying he was waiting for him to finish and that he had fun with the pilots. The protagonist says he can't gauge the man's level, and Shen tells him it's because that old man is a revenant. The protagonist then casts a spell at him, but the old man easily deflects it, saying that a verse of righteousness doesn't work on an undead. So the protagonist says that if spells don't work, he'll use his fists. The old man asks him how he plans to fight him with just a mortal body, so the protagonist kicks him in the head. However, the old man blocks her, saying it's a pity that she's not strong enough, as he repels her backward. He then launches a rapid succession of attacks that the protagonist struggles to evade. Yinan asks if the protagonist will be okay, and Shen tells her not to worry and just take their parachutes and oxygen tanks. The protagonist continues his attack, but the old man traps and throws him against the plane, then holds him and tells him that the game is over. He's going to die now, and he will take his master to extract his soul to create weapons. Meanwhile, he will deliver the girl to one of his lustful cultivators. However, Shen and the protagonist tell him they are ready and jump from the plane. The old man asks if they think they can escape when he realizes that the protagonist broke his arm and is now surrounded by golden rays as he activates the verse of the mountain and the sea. With this verse, the protagonist is capable of striking the old man and sending him flying far away. We then see when Shen talked to him about this verse. He explained that the boy mastered the verses of righteousness, which allowed him to deal with most demons. But the world of cultivators is a jungle, and sooner or later, he would have to face them. So if he couldn't win with spiritual arts, he had to do it by force, as cultivators primarily focused on ascending to immortality, making them weak in hand-to-hand combat. Shen could fight anyone with his fists without needing to use spiritual arts, so he asked the protagonist if he wanted to learn that, and the protagonist agreed. We then see the protagonist continuing to beat the old man, thinking that the verse is as powerful and heavy as a mountain and as majestic and endless as the sea, just as he delivers a blow that pierces through the plane. Shen says that maybe the boy is better suited to the verse of the mountain and the sea, as we see him falling triumphantly with the defeated old man. The old man coughs up blood, and as he falls, he wonders if he's finally going to die. He turns to the protagonist and thanks him for it. At that moment, we see a tear falling on a chessboard where a couple of kids are playing. The girl asks him what's going on, and he says that number 37 has died. She recognizes it as the kind old man who used to take care of the boy and taught him to play chess. He confirms it and explains that the old man started getting sick and was afraid he wouldn't see him again if he died. So, he killed him and turned him into an undead. The girl tells him that their enemies are after the formation of Lake Qianlong, which will be completed in a month. She instructs the boy to take all his undead and kill them. The protagonist muses that in fiction, the main character can fly with his sword after building his foundations. But as he falls, he realizes he can't do that, and Yinan appears, embracing him. Shen interrupts the moment, telling them that the most practical option was for the protagonist to share a parachute with him. He asks if they're risking their lives for a flirtation, and they reply that it's too late to change now. The parachute opens, but the protagonist realizes they are still descending too fast, and Yinan might get hurt. So, he uses the verse of the mountain and the sea to strike the water and cushion their fall. They emerge safely from the water, and Yinan tells the protagonist that he has become stronger. He notices that the girl's shirt is wet, so she turns around, calling him a pervert, though it's not like she hates him that much. Then a massive ship appears, with Shen and the veteran the protagonist faced. He refers to the veteran as bald. Yinan takes a shower after the rescue and meets the protagonist outside the ship. He asks her if she let her father know that she's safe, and she confirms that she did. However, her father had a heart attack upon learning that their plane was destroyed. She mentions that 2 innocent people were killed because of it, and she breaks down in tears. The son of the pilot was only a month old, and she feels guilty, believing that they would still be alive if not for her. The protagonist also apologizes, saying that perhaps those people wouldn't have died if he had been stronger. Then the veteran named Fanjiang Jiao, who is watching them alongside Shen, asks Shen if the protagonist will be okay. Shen replies that he is physically fine but unsure about his mental state. He mentions that although the protagonist acted with strength guided by him, it seems like he doesn't want to become a stronger man, and the act of killing might cast a shadow on his character. The veteran says he will talk to him because he has seen many young people derailed at that point, and he can't stand idly by. Shen remarks that Jiao is a good guy despite his unattractive appearance. Jiao greets the protagonist, and he thanks him for saving them. Jiao says not to mention it and notices that the protagonist seems in a bad mood, so he offers to help him relax. However, Shen reveals to the protagonist that Jiao is a bad person and asks if he's an idiot. It turns out that Jiao took the protagonist to a karaoke place with girls who tell him he must be a great guy to be so well liked by Jiao. The protagonist can sense the dreadful aura emanating from Yinan, so he asks Jiao for help. Jiao understands that he doesn't like that, so he has a plan B and takes the protagonist to a gym filled with muscular men, mentioning that he understands his preference for tough guys. The protagonist asks if this is his way of getting back at him for knocking him out earlier. Jiao then tells the protagonist that he's afraid of his own power. He explains that as he became stronger, he realized how fragile human life is and wonders if it's true that a practitioner treats a mortal like an insect just because they are strong and whether he will eventually become like that. The veteran places his hand on the boy's shoulder and tells him there's no right or wrong power. Some people use their power for evil, and others for good. He asks the protagonist to think about all the people he has saved with his power, and whether they would want him to be powerless. Shen and Yinan appear at this moment, and Shen is glad that he's not obsessed with being powerful because there are evil forces in the world, and the good ones need to be stronger to fight against evil. He asks the protagonist if he will back down or face the cruel fate to pave his own path. The protagonist smiles and thanks him, declaring that he won't be confused anymore. Jiao praises him and says it's time to put his newfound strength to the test. He thinks that now he has many friends with him, and he must defeat Jiao in front of the girl to make up for what happened the last time. The protagonist says he will try and engages in a fight with the muscular men. Meanwhile, Shen thinks that Lake Qianlong is related to the 9 Chrysanthemums sect, so they are now in trouble. Shen says it's normal that no one would want that assignment because it's related to the 9 Chrysanthemums sect. The protagonist asks what that is, and Shen explains that in the past, Chinese teachings were introduced in Japan, spreading throughout the country and forming evil sects like that. Yinan asks if they are powerful, and Shen confirms that they are because they are an ancient and mysterious sect, so they have no chance against them. Therefore, one option would be to give up the mission. Then, Xiaoyu calls the protagonist, and when he answers, she calls him a liar because they left her behind and went to Japan. The protagonist tries to explain, but she says she doesn't need an explanation. She's used to that trick and made it to Japan on her own, then hangs up. Shen says he can't risk them, but Yinan says they will do whatever the protagonist decides. The protagonist decides they will go to Japan because he has a score to settle with the sect. Jio lends them a helicopter, and the protagonist thanks him. Jio responds by telling them to be careful and that he'll buy them a drink when they return. The group departs, and Shen warns the protagonist that they will have to split up once they arrive in Japan. The protagonist will meet with the client alone, while Shen and Yinan will go to another location to prepare for the fight against the sect. He asks if the protagonist will be okay on his own, and he answers yes. 3 hours later, the protagonist arrives at the location indicated on the map and wonders where both the client and Xiaoyu are. Then, Xiaoyu arrives, kicks the protagonist in the head with a flying kick, grabs his hair, and scolds him for leaving her hanging. The protagonist asks her to stop, or she'll make him bald. Suddenly, someone asks what all the commotion is outside and if they don't know where they are. The pair turns to see that the doors of the house have opened to reveal a group of thugs who inquire about their origins and tell them to leave if they don't want to die. Xiaoyu informs them that they are the demon hunters who accepted the assignment, and the thugs surround them, saying they can't let them go in that case. Xiaoyu gets ready to confront them, but the protagonist stops her and tells her to leave it to him. She accepts and adds that they shouldn't kick her butt because she's weak. One of the thugs tells the protagonist not to be so arrogant as to try to be a hero in front of the girl. However, the protagonist knocks him out with one punch and tells the rest to come at him all at once, or it will be hard to finish quickly. Xiaoyu thinks the protagonist looks more handsome now. The thugs follow the protagonist's command and attack together, but he easily repels them, until a judo expert appears and manages to stop the protagonist's blow. Then he applies a hold, claiming that he will break all his bones. However, the protagonist kicks the wall, manages to hold onto it with his legs, and then jumps to knock out the judoka with a knee strike, astonishing the thugs. Then someone asks them to stop and hopes they forgive their rudeness since it's the first time their thugs have met hunters from China. They mention they wanted to test them no matter what happened. The thugs confirm this rare opportunity, and the protagonist sighs because it was all for this reason. Xiaoyu then asks who the woman is, and she introduces herself as Kikuko Kazama, the person who contacted them for the job. Xiaoyu inquires about the client, and Kikuko says it's not a specific person but all of them together, they are the Yamaguchi Gumi. The protagonist tells the woman about everything they went through on their way, and she says that she's now aware they will be facing the 9 Chrysanthemums sect, which the protagonist confirms. That's why they are gathering information, such as whether there will be more colleagues to help because the two of them can't handle the sect alone. Kikuko confirms there will be other hunters, and a Shinto priestess will be leading the operation. However, Xiaoyu is upset that they concealed their identity and would be dealing with sects. Kikuko apologizes for this but says that if they hadn't, no one would have accepted the assignment. So Xiaoyu suggests they should pay them more now that they know the enemy, which Kikuko agrees to. However, she won't provide more information until the others arrive, and they are allowed to spend the night there to rest. The protagonist is surprised by the room's classical and modern style, and Xiaoyu explains it's normal in Japan. The protagonist asks if she won't rest in her own room. Xiaoyu responds that she won't because the protagonist was attacked by the sect on the way. This means there is a spy among the Yamaguchi Gumi, and someone from the sect might be lurking. She believes they will be attacked again before the others arrive, so it's best to stick together. She asks the protagonist to come closer, as she has something else to ask him. The protagonist approaches, and Xiaoyu pushes him onto the bed, telling him that she knows he has advanced in his cultivation level. She tickles him to get him to reveal how he progressed so quickly because when she first met him, he was just a novice who hadn't built his foundations. Now he feels like he's on the verge of breaking through the core formation stage. This means he's almost stronger than her, and she asks if he took some perverse path. The protagonist asks what that would be, as he can't tell her that his power comes from Shen. She suggests it might be the dual cultivation of the yin and yang attributes, where two people have relations, as he has yin with him. The protagonist gets up and suggests that it's time to practice dual cultivation with her. She backs away, calling him a pervert, stating she's a minor. He just tells her he was joking. Some time later, the protagonist asks what they will do in the coming days. She admits there's nothing to do, so they can hang out. The next day, they go for a ride in a car sent by Kikuko. However, the judoka named Damon is also in the car, which upsets Xiaoyu because it feels like they're being watched. She says it's dangerous to continue. Damon explains that he knows it's because there's a spy among them, which is why Kikuko sent him to follow them. They still don't know who the spy is because their actions have been cautious and nothing should have gone wrong. They must be using some strange trick. He mentions that physical abilities like the protagonist and Zioyu's are powerful, but they are not weak either. The protagonist then asks what the difference is between them and the Japanese because they still refer to them as physical. Zioyu explains that it's due to their cultivation method. Chinese aim for immortality to change their fate, whereas the Japanese see life as a cycle that ends, so immortality is a tragedy for them. They are called psychics, and that's why there aren't as many powerful individuals in Japan because their lifespans are normal. The protagonist asks for the name of her master, but she doesn't know it, only that he's a great swordsman. He thinks it could be the Xuan Waizi that his master mentioned. Zioyu gets angry at how he's looking at her, reminding him it's a crime, and Damon tells her that the punishment is even heavier in Japan. The group enters a shopping mall where they plan to go shopping, and Zioyu asks the protagonist to buy her things because she doesn't have money. Some ladies in the mall give the protagonist disapproving looks, suspecting he's involved with a minor, and they plan to call the police. Damon warns them it would be a lot of trouble if they do so. To avoid the situation, the protagonist pretends that Zioyu is his sister, which makes the ladies leave, even though they comment that they don't look alike, and the protagonist is ugly. Zioyu agrees with this, mentioning that her brother is much more handsome than him. The protagonist then asks her about her family. She tells him that she only has two loved ones, her master and her brother. Their parents died in an accident when they were young and got trapped in the mountains. Her master found them, adopted them, and trained them. The protagonist asks if her brother is also a practitioner since she mentioned that she's the only member of her sect. Zioyu says her brother isn't interested in it. He likes technology and returned to a normal life a long time ago. Their master later disappeared, so she's the only one left in the sect, and she has to protect it. The protagonist tells her she can count on him for anything, which makes her happy. Then Zioyu finds an ear cleaner with a camera, saying it's the kind of thing her brother likes. She decides to buy it as a gift and asks the protagonist to wait for her there. On her way to buy the gift, she passes by the boy who controls the undead. Outside the mall, the protagonist thanks Damon for accompanying them, and suddenly a van stops in front of them, and the occupants open fire on them. They then try to run over the bodyguard. However, when the vehicle crashes, it's revealed that the protagonist managed to stop it with his hands and then sends it flying. Two girls then appear, saying they wanted to catch them off guard using ordinary methods. But Zioyu says it wouldn't work because the defeat of number 37 showed that the protagonist doesn't follow the usual path of cultivation. The girls say they'll have some fun. Inside the shopping mall, Zioyu sees people panicking due to the commotion outside, and she comments that she didn't expect the enemy to attack them in broad daylight. We also see the boy waiting among the crowd. And that's how the first part of this manhwa ends. If you have reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you have been one of the few people to make it here. So comment the word immortal in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.